We're back in the user interface. I know that our AIs are far from being finished and they are not perfect at all, but I think it's time to put them on the side for a few videos to give us some time to finish all the other elements of the game, and then we can come back to continue improving them in the future. And we're gonna start by improving the user interface. The first thing we're gonna do today is the portrait in the top right corner, so we can display the statistics of the current unit. So it's going to be simpler to see how many movement point and action point the active unit currently has. We're also going to update that portrait based on the unit that is under the mouse cursor. That way we can select any units on the grid and display its statistics. So that's going to be helpful. And then we're also going to add all the team's colors around all the unit icons in the user interface, so it's simpler for us to see which units are in which team. And finally, we'll also be able to use those buttons to interact with the units on the grid, so we don't have to always click on the units that are on the grid to cast the spell, for example. We can cast them by clicking on those buttons. So yeah, we have a lot of stuff to do, so let's get to it. So in Unreal, we're gonna start with the portrait that we want to display in the top right corner of the combat widget. But before we can start building that widget, we have to actually import some textures, which I'm not actually going to import. I'm just going to duplicate textures that we already have in the project. So I have in Art Texture UI right here, I have two icons. I have my little Thunderbolt icon right here, and I have the two arrows right there. I'm going to reuse those two textures for now, so I can just duplicate them and rename them. So TX icon AP for the action point, and I'm also going to duplicate and rename the other one to TX icon MP for the movement point, so I can reuse those two icons in my real widget in the game, and then in the future if I want to modify them, they are not going to modify the ones that are used in the debug menu, so that's why I want to have them completely independent from the other ones. And now that we have the two icons we need, we can go and create our new widget. So let's go in the Blueprint, Core, Combat, and Widgets folder right here and create ourselves one new user interface. I'm going to name it w_combat_unit_info and open it, obviously, because we want to add some stuff in there. And here is my widget. So there's a lot of components in there, but I'm going to go through all of them with you. The first component is a size box, because I want to limit the size of my widget in the screen. Otherwise, it would look something like that. Yeah, it's a bit big and we don't want that. So I'm going to limit the height of the widget and also the width of the widget, just like that. That's why I have a size box at the top. Then it's followed by an horizontal box, because I have two categories of element. On the left, I have the statistics of my unit, and on the right, I have the icon of the unit. And actually, since the unit icon is pretty simple, we're gonna start with that one. So I'm starting with the scale box, otherwise the component will not rescale itself properly when we change the height of the component, just like that. We can see that it works properly, and it is because we have a scale box around it. So I have my scale box, and inside the scale box I have my button, which is the same button that we reused a bunch of times in the projects already. So it's the button that contains the unit icon, and we can decide if we want to look right or left. And in my case, I'm going to look left, because this icon is going to be in the top right corner of my user interface, so it's going to be something like that. So we want the unit to look on the left, because it makes a little bit more sense. And that's it for the unit icon. Now let's go on the left side of the horizontal box, and now we have all the unit stats. On the first line, I have a text component right here for the unit's name. Right now we don't have a name for our unit, so we're just going to display the units type instead. But later on, if we want to implement the name of the units, we can display them in this text box right here. And then under that, we have an horizontal box containing all the action point and movement points. So I have my horizontal box. Inside it, on the left, I have another horizontal box, just because I wanted to group them. You don't have to put them inside another horizontal box if you don't want to, but in my case, I think it's a little bit cleaner. And then inside that, I have my first image, which has the Thunderbolt icon. And on the right, I have my scale box around a number, which is the amount of action point my unit currently has. The reason why I have a scale box right here is, let's say in the case that I have a long amount of action point, it will scale itself down to fit in the same little box. If it was not surrounded by a scale box, it will not work. The number will just grow bigger and bigger and overflow the little square in which it is. And then I have a little spacer right here to give myself a little bit of space between my two horizontal boxes, and then I have my second horizontal box, which is the exact same thing but for the movement point instead. So I have my image for the movement point, a scale box around the amount of movement point I have, and then I have the amount amount of movement point that I have. And that's it for the movement point and action points. And now we have the last thing right here, which is the HP bar of the unit. I actually just reused the W_HP bar we already created. This is the HP bar that is floating above the unit's head in the game, because yeah, since we already have a working health bar in the game, why not just reuse it, and it's going to save us some time. Perfect, so now we can compile and save this widget, and we're gonna go directly add it inside the combat widget. So let's open W_combat. And here what I want to do is to add the new widget, so the widget combat unit info right here. I want to add this widget in the top right corner, just like that, but I want it to be in the same vertical box as this widget right here, the unit turn bar, so they are attached together. So what I'm going to do is just duplicate the border above the unit's turn bar right here, and then I have my new border right there, which I then can just delete the unit turn bar inside it, because I just want to reuse the border. I'm going to take the new widget that I just dragged in it like that and put it inside the border, just like that. So now they are surrounded by a border, both of them. So I have my border for the unit info and my border for the unit turn bar. Then I can just wrap those inside a vertical box, so they are going to be attached together. So wrap with vertical box right here, and then I can connect the other one just like that, so they are attached together, and then I can just scale my vertical box so it uses the whole screen just like that, so they are really attached one on top of each other. Perfect. And now I should be able to compile and go see the result in the game. So I'm gonna play, I'm going to add a few units on the grid. Doesn't really matter which ones I add as long as I can start my combat. And here we go. Right now in the top right corner I can see my new widget right here, which is not initialized obviously because we didn't add any code in there, but it's at the top right corner. And then if I scroll in my turn bar right here on the right, we can see that they are not overlapping each other, they are really attached together. Perfect. Now we can stop, and it's time to go add some code in the new widget we just created. So let's open WCombat unit info and go in the graph to do that. And here, since we want our widget to react for both the unit that is currently active in combat and also the unit that is currently under the mouse cursor, we're gonna need to have first one reference to the combat system for the active unit, and also a reference to the player action for the unit that is currently under the mouse cursor. So since we need both of those, I think it's just going to be simpler if we just set a variable to the player action, and from there we can obtain the combat system. So let's just create a new function. Here it is, new function. I named it the set the player action, and I'm feeding it the player action as input just like that. And I'm also going to promote this into a new variable. So promote to variable, so I have a reference to the player actions. And now that we have a reference to the player action, we can simply hook ourselves to the callback that is called whenever a new tile is hovered, so we can detect if the unit under the cursor just changed. So let's connect ourselves to that new callback. Oh, that's not a callback, that's a function call. That's weird. Okay, let's double click on it to open the player action to see what is happening. Okay, that's an event. It's the event we are using to retrigger the other action when the new tile is hovered. That's pretty weird. First, it doesn't have the right name. It's not making sense. And also we don't have any callback that tells us when a new tile is hovered. So that's pretty sad. Let's create a new callback for it, and we're going to also rename this event. So the new name of my event is event_execute action when over tile change, which makes way more sense. It's more descriptive of what it does. And then I also renamed my new callback on over tile change now that I have the name available, because I renamed my event. So the on over tile change callback right here. I've also added an input right here in the top right corner. So the index that is currently over. So an endpoint like that. I don't really need it right now, but I wanted to have the same format as the unselected tile change because I think it makes more sense. And now that we have the new callback right here, we can go call it in the function that is updating the over tile. So the update over tile and unit function right here, I'm gonna go call it at the end of the function. So all the way at the end, after doing everything else, I'm just going to call my new callback right here. Perfect. Now let's compile, save, and we can go back in the unit info to attach ourselves to that new callback. So let's delete this and do a bind to on over the tile change. So bind event to over tile change, which is the new callback, and then we can create an event right here and create ourselves a new matching function that I will rename on over the tile change. Here we go. So that's it for the first callback. Now we have to hook ourselves to the second callback, the one that is in the combat system. So let's take the player action and the combat system and connect myself to the callback that is called every time a new unit starts its turn. So here it is, bind to on unit turn started, and I'm going to create myself a matching function, which I'm going to rename on unit turn started. And actually, we're not really going to add any logic in those two functions right here. They are just callback that informs us that the hovered unit changed and also the unit that is currently active in combat changed. So with these two information, now we can decide which unit we want to display in the user interface, and that's what we're going to do. We're simply going to use those two callback right here to call another function. So new function, I'm going to name it update linked unit, which is the unit that we want to display in the user interface. So we are going to update it using the information of both those sources. So let's go back in those two first function right here, and we can call the new function we just created. So we're just going to funnel those two events inside the same function that is then going to decide which unit we want to display on the screen. So now let's go do that logic, the logic that decides which units we want to display. But before starting, I'm going to add myself two new variables. So first, one variable inside the blueprint. So right here, a global variable that I named the linked unit. This is going to be the unit that is linked to the widget. This is the unit that we're going to use to refresh the user interface. It is of type BP unit, and I named it a linked unit. And then I'm going to add myself a new local variable in this function, and this one is going to be the desired unit. So we're going to compare the desired unit with the linked unit to see if we have to replace it or not before doing that. And now we can start the logic. So the first step is to set the desired unit. So which unit we want to use to display the information in the user interface. In my case, what I want is that if the player is moving his mouse over a unit, so if there's a valid over unit, I'm going to use that one. But otherwise, I'm just going to default to the current unit in the combat system. So it's either going to be the unit that is under the mouse or the unit currently active in combat. And then the next step is just to check if the desired unit is the same as the linked unit. So if they are not equal, we're going to replace the linked unit with the desired unit. Otherwise, we're not going to do anything because they are the same unit. But to replace the linked unit is not as simple as just setting it, because we are going to connect ourselves to the callbacks that are called when the unit stats change, so we can re-update the user interface as soon as the statistic changes on the unit. So if it loses an HP, we're going to refresh the user interface as soon as it happens. But it also means that if we want to replace the link unit, we have to first disconnect the previous callback, and then we can reconnect ourselves to the new callbacks. Otherwise, all the units on the grid are going to re-update the user interface as soon as their statistic changes, and that's not what we want. We just want the linked unit to re-update the user interface. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create myself a little sequence right here. The first pin is going to be used to disconnect the previous unit, and then we're going to connect the new unit using the desired unit. And now let's move on the right a little bit, continue the logic, and it's not that complicated. First, we're going to check if the linked unit was valid when trying to disconnect it, and if so, I'm just going to unbind my event on unit stats change. Right now, I don't have an event for it, so I'm just going to create a matching function. Here it is, on linked unit stats changed, and we're going to use that function to update the user interface. So here I'm disconnecting my previous unit from that function, so it's not going to call it anymore. And then with the new linked unit, if it is valid, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to connect myself to the onUnit stat change with the same function, obviously. And finally, I'm just going to make sure to call the unlinked unit stat change manually, just like that, feeding it the linked unit. That way, we're going to refresh the user interface as soon as the linked unit changes. And actually, while we're here, we have the HP bar that requires a unit to work properly. So since we're here, I'm just going to set the unit of my HP bar when the linked unit changes. Because, well, we want our HP bar to use the same unit as this widget. So let's connect it like so. I'm just going to set the unit to nothing when we are disconnecting the previous unit. And then I'm just going to set it back to the linked unit right here when we are connecting a new valid unit to it. And that's it. Now we can go inside the unlinked unit stat change to update all the numbers. And we're going to start with the simplest one, which is the HP bar, because the logic is already done in it. So we just have to call the event update HP bar. That's it. The HP bar is updated. Good. Now the next step is to update all the other numbers on the screen. So we have the action point, movement point, and also the name of the unit. So to do that, I'm just going to need to access all the statistic of the unit, obviously. And then we have to connect them to all the widget components that we have right here, all the text components. And the first thing I'm going to do is the unit name though. So I'm just going to connect it like so, because I don't have access to the name of my unit quite yet. We don't have that implemented in the game. So instead, I'm just going to use the type of my unit. So if it is a warrior, a chicken, a priest, it's just going to update the text using that variable. And then I'm just going to connect the movement point current, because I want to know how many movement point is left on my unit. And same thing for the action point. So the action point current right here, I can connect them to my text of action point. Perfect. Now we should have a working widget refreshing itself every time the stats of the unit changes. So that's good. But there's just one thing. though, the set player action. We created a function, but we're never calling it anywhere, so it's not going to enable the rest of the logic. So what we're going to do is go inside the widget combat and go in the graph to assign it at the beginning. So right here, I'm already doing the same thing for my units turn bar, so I'm going to do the same exact thing for the widget combat info that we just created. So let's just connect it right here. Here we go, set player action on the widget combat unit info, feeding it the player action. Perfect. So now we should be able to test in game and we should already have a nice result. So here I have 4 units on the grid. Doesn't really matter which one I choose. And I'm just gonna start the combat and we can see, okay, in the top right corner it says warrior with the right amount of action point, movement point, and L point. So that's good. The image is not good though. It's ranger, so we have to fix that. And also I think it will be nice to have the color of the team on the progress bar right here, the health bar, because right now it's only red. Maybe you prefer it to have red, whatever, it doesn't really matter. But in my case, I think I'm going to change the color of that progress bar because right now it's red instead of blue, so I might want to change that. Also in the bottom right corner, I saw in my log that I already have an error, but a warning, I mean, so we have to fix that. I don't know what it is, but we'll see. And then I'm just going to try to see if the numbers get updated when we move the unit on the grid. So I'm just going to move my warrior. We can see that now the warrior has 1 movement point in the top right corner, so that's good. Then I can try to cast a spell. So here it is, my number get updated in the user interface. I can cast the other spell. Here we go, it seems to work. Now if I end my turn, it should go to the ranger, which it worked, so that's good. Now it's my ranger's turn to play. I can move it around, I can cast some spell, I can attack my warrior and see if the HP gets updated. Oh, we can see that the HP bar in the top right corner gets updated when I do damage to the enemy unit, so that's pretty good. I can move my ranger around, the widget gets updated, and now if I move on the other units, we can see that the name gets updated, the values gets updated also, so it seems to work. I just need to fix the colors and the icon, obviously, and then in the log right here, I saw that I have a bunch of errors when I'm overlaying other units, so that's not good either. I'm just gonna stop and see what the errors looks like. Okay, here they are. The unit property is not valid. Okay, let's see what happens. I'm just going to click on the set text right here to bring us where the error is. And it is inside the HP bar right here. We are trying to update the HP bar when the unit is not valid, because let's say we were setting the unit right here back to nothing. We don't want to continue updating the HP bar, so I'm just going to check here if the unit is valid. So add an is valid right here to make sure that we're not updating the HP bar if the unit is not valid. Here we go. And then to update the color of the HP bar, I'm just going to do it at the end after updating the progress bar and everything. I'm just going to also update the fill color and opacity the same way we did before in the unit. So I'm just taking my unit, I'm taking the team index, I'm getting the color, and then I'm setting the new color of the progress bar. Here we go. So that should fix our issues and the HP bar should have the right color in the game. Let's start the combat, and first thing first, I don't have any errors in my log, so that's good. And if I move my mouse over the other units, we can see that they are not generating errors anymore, so that's pretty good. I can still move around and attack any tiles on the grid as usual. I can attack the other unit. We can see that it updates the HP bar in the top right corner also, so that's good. And then I can move around, I can end my turn. We can see that the border widget is updated when I end my turn because it's the turn of a new unit, so we can display its statistics. That's pretty good. And then I can move my mouse over the units. We can see that it works pretty well. The only thing that doesn't work is the portrait icon in the top right corner, so we have to fix that. Right now it's always on the ranger, and that's not good. We want to display the unit that is currently playing. So let's stop and go modify the button unit to implement that new feature. So I'm gonna go in my units, in widget, and open button underscore unit, and I'm gonna go directly in the graph, and we're gonna modify the pre-construct right here, because here we are using the unit that we received during the construct, so that's good, but we want to update the unit after the button is created. So I think what we're going to do is just collapse all that into a nice function that we're going to use to re-update the unit and change between different units. So I can just right click on that, collapse to function. Okay, Unreal didn't let me do it. That's pretty weird. I'm just going to copy all that because I know that it's gonna work. So I'm just going to copy all the nodes, create myself my new function, and paste them in there. And now we can see that there's a bunch of errors. Yeah, my callbacks here are disconnected for some reason. So I'm just going to reconnect them real quick. Okay, so I'm done reconnecting everything, and I didn't do much actually. I just reconnected those two callbacks right here and that one at the end. I really don't know why that happened. It's the first time this bug happened to me, so that's pretty weird. But these are the two callbacks I reconnected. So the onUnit over change, I reconnected it to the event, and same thing for the onUnit selected changed. And at the end right here, I have the onUnit stat change that I reconnected to my previous event. So I didn't change the logic, I just reconnected the event as before. Okay, now I also renamed the function, so set the linked unit, and we are now also going to use this function to update the unit before connecting it to the callbacks and then refreshing the user interface. We're going to be able to change the current unit in the game. So I'm just going to set the unit right here before doing all the logic. So I can just reconnect that at the beginning and reconnect it in the middle right there. So we are updating the current unit, and then we can connect ourselves to all its callback properly. And then I'm just going to go back in the graph real quick to reconnect my new function right here in the pre-construct, just like that. So set linked unit, and I'm feeding it the default unit, which means that this bit of code right here should be the exact same thing as what we had before. It's just in the function now. So everything should behave as before. And now if we go back in the set linked unit, we're going to change a few things though, because we want to be able to disconnect the previous unit right here before connecting to a new one, and the same way we did in the UnitInfo. So I'm just going to add myself a new pin in my sequence, and we're going to disconnect the previous unit right here at the top. Oh, and also just make sure that the name of this variable right here is not the same as the name of your variable that is already in the blueprint. Otherwise it's a little bit confusing. So I'm just going to rename it the desired unit instead of just the unit. Here we go. So now both of them have different names. Okay, now we can disconnect the previous unit before connecting the new one. So if the previous unit was valid right here, we're just going to disconnect all its callbacks. So I'm just going to go on the right here. We have a first callback right here, the onUnit over change. I'm just going to unbind this one. Then I have those two callbacks. I can unbind those two also. So the onUnit selected change and also the onUnit active in combat. And finally, if I go on the right, I have one last callback to disconnect right here. Here we go. Unbind event from onUnit stats change. Perfect. Now we are ready to call this function and update the unit that is assigned to it while the game is running, and we're gonna do that inside the UnitInfo. So let's go in there. I'm gonna go in the update linked unit function, and at the end right here, after updating the unit link to the HP bar, we're gonna do the same thing but for the button unit. So here I can disconnect everything. So I'm setting the desired unit to nothing like we did for the HP bar, and then we're just going to set it back to the linked unit right here. Perfect. So now in the game, the image should update itself. So let's start the combat, and yeah, it seems to work. If I move my mouse over another unit, we can see that the image in the top right corner changes based on that unit, and then I can just like move around. It seems to work. If I end my turn, it also updates the image. Great, so it seems to work perfectly. That's good. But there's still another improvement I want to do, because right now we can see that the border around the unit is highlighted because it is the active unit. We can see that if we over another unit, this border disappears, and that's a bit annoying. I don't really like that. So we're just going to remove that border completely for this big icon in the corner. So let's go back in the button unit, and here I'm actually just going to create myself two new variables, because I'm also going to override the scaling that happens when we are overing the unit, because I don't want that either. So I'm just going to create myself two booleans. I named the first variable enable selected outline, and I've made sure to make it instance editable, expose and spawn, and the default value is set to be true because we want the outline to be enabled by default. And then for the second one, I named it enable over the scaling, and same thing, instance editable, expose and spawn, and the default value is set to true. And now we can go use them in the graph. So let's go in there, and I'm gonna start right here in the set is selected. This is where we are showing the blue border around the selected unit. So in my case, I'm just going to show it if the unit is selected, first of all, and also if the selected outline is enabled. So we'll now be able to disable the outline if we want to, and we're gonna do the exact same thing right here, a little bit lower in the overed. So if we are overing a unit, we are modifying its scale, but in my case, I'm just going to do it if the feature is enabled. So if the unit is overed and the scaling is enabled, then we're gonna modify the scale of the button. Let's compile this, and then we can go inside the wcombat UnitInfo, go in the designer, and now we should be able to select the button and uncheck the both checkbox right here on the right. So the enable selected outline is now disabled, and the overed scaling is now disabled also, which should give us the result we want in the game. So let's see how it looks now. And it seems to work, because right now I don't have any outline around that icon anymore. And if I move my mouse over this unit, we can see that the button in the turn bar gets updated, it gets scaled properly, but the button in the top right corner doesn't get scaled because we disabled it. So it seems to work. And now same thing, if I over the other units, we can see that the outline is not there, and I can do the same thing if I change the unit's turn. Good, now the next thing I want to do is to re-add another border. We just removed the border. Now I want to re-add another one. But that one is just going to display the color of the teams that the unit is in. So right here, the warrior is going to be inside a blue border, which is right now, so that doesn't matter. So the warrior is going to be surrounded by a blue border because it's in the blue team. The ranger is going to be surrounded by a red border, and the slime is going to be surrounded by a green border. So that's what I want to do, and we're going to do that inside the button unit. And I'm actually just going to go in the designer to add the border first. So I'm going to create it by wrapping my button unit inside it. So wrap with the border, which is just right here. I'm going to rename the component border underscore team color, and I'm going to make it a variable in the top right corner. Then I'm going to copy all the variables we set in the border is selected into the other one. So I'm going to copy the brush, go in the team color, paste the brush. I'm going to go back in is selected, copy the brush color, paste it in the border team color. Here we go. And then the last thing is the padding right here, which I just can make it to 5. Here we go. Now everything should be the same. Okay, good. It seems to work. And now we can go in the graph to set the color of the border. So I'm going to go right here at the bottom, all the way at the bottom, and I'm going to create myself one new event, event underscore set team index color. And I'm actually just going to promote that into a new variable, which I'm going to name team index. Here we go. This variable is going to be instance editable as usual, and I'm also going to make it expose on spawn. I'm going to compile it, and I'm going to set the default value to -1 because we don't want to set an index by default. And now with that index, we can update the border colors. So just like that, we take the border team color, set the brush color using the team color. And now to test it, I'm just going to go add that inside the set linked unit because it's called in the pre-construct. So right here, we're processing the unit, and at the end right here, after doing the is selected, I'm just going to update the team index color using the variable. Perfect. Now let's compile save, and if we go back in the designer, now we should be able to go in our variable right here and change the color of the background. So if I select 0, it's going to show the team 0, 1, 2, and 3. So it seems to work. That's good. But the colors are a little bit dark, and that's not nice. So I'm just going to go change something in the settings. So in the brush team color right here, I'm going to reset the tint so it's white. Here we go. So now the color makes more sense. It's more what we want it to be. Good. Okay, so that seems to work. And now we just have to update the color of the border based on the team index of the linked unit. We could do that right now by simply taking the team index of the unit, but in the case that the unit changes its theme, we don't have a callback for that. So let's go create a callback first. That way it's going to update itself all the time automatically. So I'm going to go in my units and open the BP unit right here, and I'm going to create myself a new callback. I named it onUnit team index changed, and right here in the top right corner, I added a new variable for the BP unit. Now we can go inside the teams and set team index right here in the function where we are setting the team index of the unit. And after all the logic is done, at the end, we're going to call the callback to notify the rest of the game that the unit changed its team index. Here we go. So now the callback is called, and we can go use it inside the button unit. Now in the graph right here, I'm gonna go at the end in the set linked unit, and we're gonna connect ourselves to this new callback like we did for all the other ones. And as before, the first step is to unbind the previous unit. So let's do that. I'm going to unbind myself from the onUnit team index changed, but right now we don't have an event to connect to it. So I'm going to go back in my event graph right here. I'm going to go near my set team index color right here, and I'm going to create myself a new custom event just like that, onUnit team index changed, and I'm feeding it a unit as input because that's the same definition as the callback. Now I can go back in the set linked unit and connect my new event to it. So onUnit team index changed. Here we go. That's done. And then now that the previous unit is disconnected, we can connect the new unit. So I'm going to do that right here, bind event to onUnit team index change, feeding it the same event. And since I'm here, I'm just going to also call my event right away, just so it's updated right as soon as we are changing the unit. Perfect. Now let's go back in the event graph to code this event. And actually, we don't have much to do. We just want to call this other event, feeding it the team index, just like that. And I think that should work, so I'm going to go in the game, see the results. I'm going to add a few units on the grid in different teams, as usual. And now if I start my combat, we can see, yeah, the border around the buttons right here on the right, they are corresponding to the unit's team color. So I have my warrior in blue, my priest in red, and my slime in green. And if I end my turn, we can see that the borders follow in the top right corner. That's good. But there's just one thing here on the left. We can see that we also have those same buttons, but they don't have the colors around them. So I just want to also have the color around around those buttons too. So I'm just going to stop, and these buttons are spawned in the debug menu, I think, in the tabs, in the tab combat right here, and in the graph. I'm gonna go in the function where we are adding those buttons in the user interface. So in populate unit theme grid right here, I'm going to feed it the unit. So I can just take my unit and feed it like so. There we go. So now if we compile, we should go back in the game and see that now if I add units, yeah, they now have the borders around them. Same thing if I had priest in another team, slimes in another team, and etc. We can see that it works. All the units now have different colors, and that's pretty nice. And also if I hover all those units on the grid, we can see the corresponding unit highlighting in the debug menu. So that's pretty good too. But now as a next step, I would like to do the opposite actually. I would like that if I hover these buttons in the debug menu or in the combat menu, I would like it to do the exact same thing as I'm doing when I'm hovering the units on the grid. So I would like to display the reachables or display its statistics and things like that when I'm hovering the icons and not just the units that are on the grid. Right now it's only working one way, from the grid to the debug menu or the user interface, but I want to do the opposite. And to do that, we're gonna have to modify a few things in the player action to override which unit is hovered by the mouse cursor. So let's go in the player actions. And I'm going to create myself one new function right here, set over the unit override. So this function is going to set a variable in the blueprint to use to override the unit that is currently under the mouse. So we can feed another unit instead of that one, which we're gonna do by setting the unit that is linked with the button we are currently hovering. This variable, I'm going to promote it into a new variable right here and set it. So the new variable is the over the unit override, and if that variable is valid, we're gonna use it to override the unit that is under the mouse. And since that's going to affect the override unit, we have to call the event right away, otherwise it's just going to update itself on the next frame, which I guess it's fine, but right away it's better. So we are calling the update over tile and unit, and in there we're gonna change a few things. So we're gonna focus on that part right here. Right now we are taking the unit that is currently under the mouse and we're automatically feeding it to the override unit if it's not the same as the previous override unit, obviously. But in our case, we don't always want to do that anymore. We don't want to get the unit that is currently under the mouse cursor if the override unit is valid. So the first thing I'm going to do is just start by disconnecting those two links. So I'm going to disconnect, and I'm going to promote this into a new local variable right here that I named the U. I'm going to use that variable to reconnect both those links, just so it's a little bit cleaner. Here we go. So I have my U right here and my U right there. We didn't change the logic at all. It should work as before. If you want to test it, it should work as before, but now we're going to change it a little bit because we don't want to call this bit of code when the override unit is valid. So at the beginning right here, I'm just going to check, okay, is my override unit valid? If so, I'm going to do a different bit of logic, which is simply to set the U using the override unit. Here we go. Otherwise, I'm going to do the same exact logic as before, and I'm going to take the unit that is currently under the mouse cursor. So good, now we should be able to override what is under the mouse using the unit override, and we're gonna set that variable by calling the set over the unit override function right here inside the button unit by using the unit that is currently linked to the button. So that unit right there, actually the unit right here, we're gonna use that unit to set the override inside the player action. And to do that, I'm gonna need to override two functions that are in the widget. So the first one is the onMouse enter, so when the mouse starts hovering the button, and the second one is the onMouse leave, so when the mouse ends hovering the button. So perfect. Now I'm just gonna move that on the right here, and we're gonna do the logic of these events to feed the unit to the player action. And to be able to do that, the first thing we need is a variable reference to the player action, otherwise we cannot call the function on it. So let's create a new variable for it. I have my player action right here. It is of type BP player actions, and I've also set it to instance editable and expose on spawn, just so it's simpler for us to set. Now when the mouse starts hovering on top of the button, we're gonna check if the player actions is valid. So if we set that variable, then we're also going to check if the unit variable that we have right here is also valid, because otherwise we don't want to set an override in the player action using an invalid unit. That will not make sense. So if the unit is valid, we're gonna set it as an override in the player action. So in the player action, I'm setting the override unit override using the unit linked with the button. And now for when the mouse leaves the button, we're going to do the opposite. We are still going to check if the player action is valid. We're still going to check if the unit is valid. And then we're going to remove the override in the player action. But before we do that, I'm just going to add a little check right here just to make sure that the unit override inside the player action is the same as the unit we have in the button. Otherwise, maybe one other button for some random reason will deselect the override in the player action. And that will not really make sense in my opinion. So I'm just going to add that little check right here to make sure that it's the same button that adds the override and removes the override. And right here after that I can just set the unit override to nothing just to remove the override in the player action. Perfect. But now before we can test all that, we have to set the value of player action, because otherwise the button is not going to be able to call the function on the player action, because the player action is not going to be valid. And we're gonna do that in 3 places, I think. The first place is in the wcombat UnitInfo, because there's a button right here and we want to set the player action so when we are overing that button, it selects the unit that is on the grid. I'm gonna go in the graph, and that's gonna be inside the set player action function right here. At the end, I'm just going to set the player action on my button. So let's take the button, and I can simply set the player action like so. So in the button unit icon, I can set the variable player action using the player action. Okay, that's good. That's done for the first place. Then the second place I want to change it is inside the turn bar. So I have my widget turn bar right here. When we are overing the buttons in the turn bar, we might want to over the units on the grid. So I'm gonna go in there. We're gonna go in the function update units turn bar, which I'm already in, so that's good. And we're gonna feed the player action to the create button widget like that. Here we go. So now the button is going to be aware of the player action, and it should be able to over the unit in the game when we are overing the buttons. So let's see how it goes. Okay, so here are my 4 units on the grid, and if I move my mouse over them on the grid, we can see that the over behavior still works, so that's good. But if I over the buttons on the right, we can see that it also works. I'm able to over the units on the grid using the turn bar, and that's pretty great. It helps us find the units if we are not able to find them with our eyes. That's good. And now there's just one last little thing I want to do before ending to this video, and it is to be able to cast spell using these buttons, because right now if I select my spell and I try to cast it on the target, let's say I'm going to click on my warrior, we can see that I'm not able to cast the spell. It doesn't work at all. But if I click on the warrior on the grid, now it works, but I'm not able to cast it in the turn bar. But I would like to do that because the unit is overed when I'm doing that, so that would be nice to be able to cast the spell in those situations. And the reason why it's not working right now, if I go in my player action, so we can see why it's not working, I'm just going to place it right here. Let's say we can see that the left mouse button, if I click anywhere on the grid, the event is firing. We can see the flow firing. That's pretty good. But if I'm clicking on those buttons, now it's not firing at all. It's not doing anything, and that's the reason why it's not working, because the buttons are blocking the flow and they are preventing this event right here, the left mouse button, to be called. So what we're going to do is just add ourselves another event beside it so we can call it when we are clicking on the button. So let's go do that. So let's start by creating ourselves the event we need. So event underscore simulate left click from external sources. That's the name I gave it. And then I'm going to call both branches of my left button right here. So I'm going to call this one and then that one. So I'm just going to add myself a little sequence, connect the first one to the first one and the second one to the second one. So we are pressing the button and then releasing the button. Perfect. So that should work. We should now be able to simulate a left click using this event, and we're gonna go call it inside our button unit. So let's go back in the button unit and we're gonna go where we are clicking on the button. So I think it's right here on the unclicked button unit. After calling the callback, we're simply going to check if the player action is valid, and if it is, we're simply going to simulate a left click. Here we go. So now we should be able to cast the spell using the button in the turn bar. Here we go. So here I have all the units on my grid, and they are all in different teams, and we can see all the team colors on the right here, and it's pretty nice. It's also easier to see which unit is in which team because they are surrounded by the right color on the right, so that's pretty good too. And on top of that, we have the overview of the unit stats in the top right corner. So if I move and use action point, we can see that they are reducing in the top right corner. So now we have all the informations we need to know how many action points and movement points all the units on the grid have, which is really useful to help us plan our turns in a tactical game. So perfect. For the last feature we implemented, I'm going to try to cast my spell on the ranger, but using the turn bar on the right. So I'm going to click on the ranger and we can see that it works now. I'm able to cast my spells on the unit using the turn bar, and that's pretty great. Good. So I guess that's gonna be it for today's video. It's been a little bit of a long one, even though we just did some user interface. That's how it is with user interface, I guess. But anyway, I guess that's gonna be it for today, and I'm gonna see you in the next one. Bye bye.